one never knows, one of the easy things about teaching class is you know who's in the class. I don't, so when I mispronounce your name, I'm sorry. But what I thought might be fun is you look at a case that's dated 1985 and you say, why would anybody ever teach a case that old? Well, it turns out this case is still being taught around the world because it really was one of the things that led to a change in the way we think about teaching entrepreneurship. And Bob Reese, who's the hero of the case, is a good friend. I talked to him last week. He's still running around the world creating companies and trying to change it. But I thought it'd be interesting because I know Claudio comes from some place in, his background's economics, and they think risk and reward go together. You got to take risks to get reward. Isn't that the bullshit? Isn't that the stuff they teach? I have never met an entrepreneur who gets something where he says, where's the risk? I need more risk. Please give me risk, God, because I want the reward. It's please give me the reward, and I'll find some person who will take the risk without being paid adequately for it. That's what banks are for. They take all the risk and don't get any of the reward. So it's a wonderful deal for the entrepreneur. It's particularly true in real estate and they don't deal with startups because they like to drive using their rearview mirror much better. So I thought what we might try to do today is let's start with a case. Might take 40 minutes because you're faster than the Harvard MBAs, and I'll drive it harder too. And then we'll talk a little bit about sort of the general concept of entrepreneurship in a way that I think might be helpful. How many of you want to be entrepreneurs? That's a small group, but we'll try and convert some of the rest. Because ultimately, we are all sort of principals for our own account. Now, some people think let me ask you a question. Which was more risky? Joining a startup in Albuquerque, New Mexico in 1973 or working for IBM in 1973? Yeah, working for IBM was clearly much more risky than joining Microsoft. And I could go through quite a list of other companies because most people think you join a big firm and you don't have risk. Well, what you do is you wait for some idiot in New York to make a decision that hurts you, and you have no control over it. At least when you do something stupid as an entrepreneur, you have only yourself to blame. So we'll get into that later. But let's talk about now, is there chalk? Oh, yes. First time in a class. I understand this is the first use of this classroom?
Yeah, first time.
So I get to dirty the blackboards for the first time. And I did something these are like, okay. I should have checked this out beforehand. No, I got it figured out. It says middle and up front. It's not too hard. Even I didn't go to MIT, but I can figure that out. Is the game business risky, do you think? Everybody's shaking their head, yes. But I guess why is it risky?
Well, you never know if the game's gonna, you can test it out before you launch it, so you never know if it's gonna be viable or not. It's not a product that is stable. So, and it's very short term, so you can invest a lot of money in developing the game in it. And it can be successful for a period of time, and then you can come up and use all your market.
So it's like going to Vegas. You throw some money on the table, you roll the dice, and you see what happens. And and if you're a small player, is it better or worse to be small in this industry? Worse. That's generally a true statement, by the way. It's worse to be small. But why do the big guys win? This is where Claudio's sort of economics training helps. Why is it good to be big in this business?
You have money for it.
Okay? If you're going to run a fad, you have to spend on advertising. What else?
You can also diversify.
Many bets.
You have a good contact with the retailers that are very important players for this market.
Yeah, if you're a big guy, do you want to order from a small guy who says, I've got a great idea. I will deliver just at the most important time in your season when everybody's coming to shop, and I promise you, beyond a shadow of a doubt, I was a Boy Scout, Scouts honor, I will deliver the product on time with high quality.
Bargain.
Excuse me?
Bargain.
Yeah.
Bargain, gain and scale. Can bargain with suppliers.
Oh.
With, retailers.
If I have high volume, I actually did take a couple of economics courses once. I tried to forget them, but they do say scale economies work, that I can get more for less. And by the way, my suppliers will listen to me a little more if I'm big. You know. Why is Walmart win? Do they have the best products? No, they're just big, powerful, and nasty. And they drive their suppliers. You know, the only worst thing not selling to Walmart is selling to Walmart. Because they will drive you to where you have no profit left. You know, it's the great news. I got a big order from Walmart. Even better news, they're now 50% of my production. Now what happens? We'd like you to lower our prices by a little bit. Like, we figured out how much money you're making and we'll take it all away. Okay, so this is a tough game for a small guy. It's a bad business. Let's think about Bob Reese. What does Reese bring to the party? So he knows the industry. Now, one of the reasons I write badly is you can't understand how badly I spell. We'll just pretend that I'm spelling correctly. Okay. Now, so he has got what good does experience do you in this business? You know, you guys don't have your coat on. It's too hot. Okay. Yes,
Yeah, we got an extensive experience. Actually, the memorandum he did for the partner he was looking for was pretty much all the experience he had. He could say how much the TV was important, how much the market, how to market the product, and so on. So we had this extensive experience. And not only that, he knew lots of people he could approach to help him in his the parts he didn't know the shadow.
Okay, so
He also had some personal characteristics like leadership and entrepreneurship. He was curious, so he could take risks.
yeah, he had this sense of the market, didn't he? He sort of had some rules of thumb. I'm sure that he did extensive economic analysis and did a market study. Or what did he really do? He said,
He's a seller. He's a good seller.
you know, it's interesting. We had a review of the curriculum at Harvard Business School once, and we asked what were the critical skills. And we went around the faculty, and they came up with things like constrained optimization and all sorts of words like that. And I finally raised my hand after I'd listened to this and almost threw up. And I said, yeah, I've known a lot of CEOs that don't even know what the word constrained optimization means. But you've not mentioned salesmanship. And I have never met a CEO that doesn't understand selling. And yet, almost no schools have anything on selling. It's a very interesting process. But He's a salesman. He loves to sell. Now, what does it take to be a good salesman?
Understand the needs of the consumer.
Okay, he's got, many salesmen are passionate, but it's only about their commission. They'll sell anything. You know, just go around with the investment bankers, and they're passionate about their commission, nothing else. He listens. Now, what do you mean by influence?
People.
Oh, how do you get influence over people, Cameron?
Or network. I think it has a relative network. He knows a lot of people. And he has a history in industry. He made a good deal selling his own company at the beginning.
So he's got some self-confidence. He's not worried about failure. You know, if you're worried about being told no, you never ask for a date, right? So he's actually a guy that is pretty self-confident, and so he's willing to call and have somebody say no to him, but that's okay, because he knows he's had enough success in the past to do it. Now, okay, so I guess what you're saying is there's a lot of pluses on the Bob Reese side and a lot of negatives on the industry side. Now, I think it was Warren Buffett who said, when a good industry meets a bad, or a good manager meets a bad industry, it's usually the industry's reputation that remains intact. I believe that's a quote from Buffett. So this gets complicated now. So we got a good manager who knows the industry, and we have what would be on quick analysis a bad industry. These are much better boards than you used to have, thank you. They work. So what does he have to do? How critical is the timing here? He's got some ideas, and you have an industry. What's going on in the industry?
Concentration.
Okay, so we have two big guys. So that's here. When do you sell games? The retail goes at Christmas time.
4 weeks before Christmas.
Okay, so,
February.
oh, so even though the games are sold just before Christmas, you have to sell them to the marketplace in February. And what's the date that he's trying to make this decision? Well, he's in October. So he's got a little bit of a problem, doesn't he? He's got 4 months to do what?
Sign all the contracts, develop a contract.
Okay. And is he starting with a lot of resources? Does he have a department he can say, go do this?
He doesn't like that. He doesn't believe.
Well, what Bob would say is the ideal business is a post office box to which people send money. Any additional overhead compromises my basic personal values. He hates overhead. And by the way, that's a characteristic of more than a few great entrepreneurs I know. They do not like overhead. It's unproductive. They're, in accounting, don't they say fixed costs aren't and variable costs don't? That somehow we have this notion of fixed and variable costs, but any cost is hated by most entrepreneurs. And what's critical about this timing? What does he have to do in the next 4 months? I guess you say he has to do everything. So how does he think about this problem? He's got a slightly different business model. What do you mean, Pablo?
He defines how he's going to do promotion, sales, manufacturing.
So his mind is outsource everything. Yeah, except profit. We'll keep the profit for myself. We'll outsource everything else. This is a good plan. So if we think of it chronologically, he's got to get Alan Charles, the game designer. I guess you can't sell anything if you don't have a product. So he's got to get Alan Charles. Who else does he have to get? Excuse me? Okay. So who's the manufacturer here? Yeah, there's sort of manufacturing. There's printing. And then there's assembly. And for that, he's looking to get a cheese shipper, right? Swiss Colony. Okay. Now, who else does he have to get? Oh, I guess I should give them a big part of the board, shouldn't I? Because if the concept is TV, what does he know about TV? He knows how to turn it on, I suspect. And that's about it. I don't think he spends a lot of time looking at TV. Okay, what else does he need? Financing. Okay, so in comes his friend Sam Kaplan, who's going to lend him the money or put the money in. Okay, who else?
Sales, marketing.
Okay, we need sales reps. Now, he wrote a book, in case you haven't, if any of you are interested, there's a book on manufacturers' representatives. Now, are there manufacturers' representatives in Brazil? I know there are. I don't know any of them. How many of you know what a manufacturer's rep does? Oh, this is an educational failure. My father was a manufacturer's rep. My father was the world's worst businessman. He had 14% of the land area of the United States and 1% of the population. It's much better to have 14% of the population and 1% of the land area. He traveled about 70 or 80,000 miles a year in a car to sell products that people didn't want. But I have lots of them at home in case you need them. But sales reps are very interesting. They're independent business people. They represent many manufacturers, and they have lots of contacts. Okay, what else does he need? He's got sales rep. Ricardo?
He needs the questions. I don't think Alan Charles will do that alone. And
Yeah.
he did something very extraordinary on that, because he gave the questions to the TV guy, people to write them.
He needs content.
Bring word of mouth.
As you get over here, have we sold anything yet? We need customers, don't we? It's a fundamental rule of business. We are trying to perform a cashectomy. This is where you take cash out of somebody's pocket and put it in yours without inducing too much pain. It's a very important skill. So, and he's sort of divided customers into two groups, hasn't he? Why would you divide them into two groups? Oh, so he's got the high end, and then he's got the mass marketers. Anybody else he needs?
It is a factoring company that
Yeah.
will deal with the payments, the bills.
Walter Heller, he'd like to get paid. Is it easy for a small guy to get paid? One of the best deals I ever invested in my life was something where a young couple of guys invented a product. It was a good product. They had all the managerial skills of the Keystone Cops. And at some point, they were running out of money. We said, you got to sell this business. It's a good product. They went to some of America's finest companies and got him to, we warned them they ought to actually get some signatures on non-disclosure, non-competes, et cetera. And they did. And then the show that came up, there was an exact copy of their product, down to and including a picture of the inventor's nephew. And we thought that wasn't nice, so we went to them and said, that isn't nice. And they said, you're too poor to sue us, which is true. They just had looked at the company. They forgot that some of the investors got mad. And so we actually sued them. The lawyer said, well, this is an open and shut case. It's an exact copy, everything. So how much will it cost us? $250,000. That'll cover this lawsuit. I said, just in case you're wrong, will you do the rest of it on contingency? And they said, oh, sure, because it was so clear. 6 years later, $6 million of legal fees. We won a $100 million judgment for a company that we would have been happy to sell for $2 million. So it was a good deal. But it does reflect how hard it is sometimes to deal with big companies who have a job of saying no. And when they said, oh, this is a stock photo, they said, this isn't copyright. I said, well, it's interesting. It's the inventor's nephew. I wonder how he got into the stock photo business. But it was, so Heller becomes pretty important. So let's go. I like to do things simply. What's Alan Charles going to give? What do we need from him? A game design. And what else do we need? Speed, right? We need this man who's got a lot of other clients to put this ahead of everybody else. This is just before Christmas. What does he need from us? Well, he needs an answer to his wife's question, why are you working over Christmas time, right? I mean, it's a fairly simple question, but most of the time spouses ask that, you know. This is supposed to be vacation time, why are you working? Now, what did we give him? Well, we gave him royalties. How did he normally work? He normally worked for a flat fee, about $30,000 to design a game. We gave him a royalty of 5%. Yeah, so let's say 4%. 4% on $12.50 is 50 cents a game. If you sell 500,000 games, how much is that? $250,000, roughly. Let's see, 30,000, 250,000. Which would I rather have? Now, why would he believe, if I walked into Alan Charles and says, I've got this great idea, I can sell 500,000 games, will you do it for nothing up front, and I'll pay you 5% at the end? What's he going to say to me? You're smoking stuff that smells funny, Howard. Why does he listen to Bob Reese? Yeah, all the things that are up there help Bob Reese work on this. So we give him a royalty plus assurance that he knows that Bob will do everything he can, and he's got a reputation for not reneging on his deals. So that works. I'm going to skip TV Guide for a minute in the content. What about the manufacturers? The printing, all that stuff. Are they doing anything to invest in this? They're just being paid. It's a print job, right? Now, what has Bob done that makes this more simple than, for example, Trivial Pursuit? Yeah, he's putting a booklet. How hard is it for a printer to make a booklet? Okay, so printing, we want them to do a good job, fast, on order.
We pay them well.
And we pay them well. We pay them normal, but well. So they're not really, How about Swiss Colony? Are they doing the hard part or the easy part?
It's all their off-season.
Oh, okay, so what we need from them is accuracy. It's really embarrassing if the boxes don't contain all the small parts that you need.
Yeah, very little time to assemble it.
Quickness. They're going to get an order, and they got to be prepared to ship accurately, quickly, and write the right bill. Is that hard to do? Well, it's hard to do if you've never done it before. If you're trying to start it up, what does Swiss Colony do? They sell lots of bad cheeses on order when the company says, I want to send out 50 baskets to my friends, or my friends, and they do it all in the space of a few weeks just before Christmas. So what are we giving them? Are we paying them a lot?
Per box.
Excuse me?
Per box.
Okay, so Robert said it's in their slack season. Why is that important to them? How do you think the Swiss Colony business looks if you think of their business model?
They can keep their people working longer instead of laying them off. They're helping their own business, core business.
Yeah, in some ways, it's not keeping the people. Their business looks like this. And what you're doing is doing something like that, right? Now, why is that good for their business? Would you rather train the hourly workers on somebody else's job or on yours? Do you think this is harder than or easier than their traditional cheese baskets?
Easier.
Much easier. You got to put the same thing in every box. Whereas the cheese baskets, you have 70 or different SKUs. It's a complicated thing, so you bring in the farmer, the temporary workers, they come in, they practice on it. You can see who's good. Is there any other benefit to Swiss Colony, do you think? Okay. You own the plant. You're not using it. How profitable is this to use the plant in this time of season? You got all the fixed costs being expended, and all this is marginal revenue. Excuse me?
Incremental revenue.
It's incremental revenue.
Helping to pay the fixed cost.
Yeah, it's contribution to fixed cost, which is generally pretty profitable. And you think that they'd like to be in another business other than the cheese business? If you can demonstrate you can fulfill for other manufacturers, is this a good demonstration account for them to say, look, you want assembly, we can do assembly. It's opening a new market. So it's money, it's incremental revenue, and a market opening. What's there not to like about that? And why would they even consider this? Doesn't it have something to do with Sam? They don't know Bob from Adam, but they know Sam. So Sam says, look, you'll get paid, and I'm responsible for paying you. By the way, that's also true. It's interesting. Both of these are not Bob's relationships. They're Sam's relationships. So Bob is leveraging Sam into other relationships that he can use his knowledge and his credibility to get incremental business. Now, what about Sam?
He likes to give his finger.
Okay, so what we need from Sam is connections. He's investing the money. But I thought Bob had some money. Why doesn't he use his money, not Sam's? Well, there's an old expression. If you grab people by their wallets, their hearts and minds will follow. If he's invested that he will probably actually do more than if you ask him simply to do me a favor. So by grabbing him by the wallet and saying, follow me, he comes with you. Okay, so you need connections, money, any other things? Who's actually running the book? For those of you in investment banking, running the book is when you make sure the orders come in, you make sure that the invoices, the billing, all of that. That's Sam's company. We want his sort of operational expertise, and we're giving him money, 50% of profit, as defined, which is we'll come back to, and we're also giving him what else? Now, Robert, I know, is retired. I've retired.
Fun.
Keep busy. Keep busy.
Yeah. You know, you get up in the morning and say, I don't play golf very well. I don't even like the game. I can only play a certain amount of tennis. And bridge now I can do on my iPad, so that's okay. Now what am I going to do? And so this is sort of fun. It's something new. And he gets to talk to his old friends. So it's fun for him. Okay, sales reps. So this is all sort of a bunch, isn't it? In a funny way, when we got Sam, we got all of that. Now, what about sales reps? What do we need from them? Well, doesn't Bob know everybody in the game business? Couldn't he go out and sell this?
Distribution is scary.
A lot.
So we need to be out there and talking to a whole bunch of customers quickly. And this is a way to do it. Now, do you think it's different? How many of you think you could get in to see a buyer at Walmart or Kmart quickly? No. I mean, why? How many people are calling on Walmart on a daily basis? Thousands. You know, they have little desks, very spare offices, and they're sitting in Bentonville, Arkansas, and they know why you're there. Now, so what does a sales rep bring to you? Excuse me? Contacts, a network. So we're using their network. Now, how many of you have ever dealt with a buyer for a big company? Imagine what are they like, Daniel?
They're like sharks.
They're like sharks after a long period of not eating.
You are a bleeding piece of meat in front of them.
Oh, would you care to go on? I think you're starting to get the image.
Yeah.
Do they trust you?
I'm very lucky guy to be alive to this day. Yeah. Yeah. I haven't done this market 20 years ago to stay alive. Yeah.
And do they trust the people that come to them? No. And what kind of contracts do they write?
Just one direction contract just for them.
Yeah. We'll protect ourselves against everything you do, and we have full rights to do anything we want. Now, when you walk in as a new representative, maybe you can, I walk in and I say, I'm representing this new little company. I've been selling you for years, Dan. I'd like you to take on this product. What do you say to me?
Okay, let's see how much money I will make on this contract.
Okay? That's the first thing. I want to know my margin.
And I want to know your margin too.
I want to know your margin. Oh.
Yeah, that's true.
We're going to play strip poker before we're getting undressed before we play strip poker.
Who else are you selling it to?
Oh, who else are you selling to? I want some exclusivity. If I'm big enough, I can demand. And by the way, do they really think this little company can deliver? Their worst risk, if you're the buyer, is what?
Not able to deliver to
They're not be able to deliver. So imagine the conversation with the buyer. What are they going to say to you? It'll be probably something like this, excuse the language. If that son of a bitch doesn't deliver on time with high quality, you'll never sell me anything again. You still want the order.
But we will have a fine in the contract to protect regarding everything that you are not going to sell me anymore. I'm going to charge the fine to the manufacturer.
You have money to pay the fine?
Yeah.
Well, the little company doesn't, but the manufacturer's reps have done pretty well. But even my father did okay because he represented about 15 different brands. You know, he represented Shure microphones, he represented JBL speakers, he did a lot of consumer electronics. But you know, these guys are tough sons of, so you're using their credibility to get into these companies, which is different than Bob. If I walk in as Bob as the principal, they know I'm lying. Oh, of course we can do it. But if you have a manufacturer's rep sitting there, you can say you're putting your reputation and all the future sales at risk. Therefore, you'd better believe really hard. And what are you giving them? Well, one, you're giving them a commission where they know you won't cut it. I mean, one of the things my father learned is if you sell too much for a company, what do? They start either cutting your commission or putting a direct sales force in place. So you never wanted your commissions from one company to exceed the cost of a salesman, because then they'd immediately say we can do it cheaper, have more control, etc. I mean, I hate to say this is a dog-eat-dog business. I think my father never made more than about $20,000 in his life. In fact, most of the time it was less than that. So, is there something else we're giving? What do you think the life of a manufacturer's rep is like?
Traveling around also.
You're sitting a lot outside of an office of somebody who's going to be a son of a bitch. And what's the second question after how's your wife is what's new? Now, why do you need to have something new if you're walking in to talk to a buyer? They're bored too, right? They've seen all your products. You know, you're just here to get an order. Well, no, I have a new product you ought to see. So you're offering them some novelty, which actually starts a conversation. You may not care how much you sell of this, but you want to get in there to start the position for the other parts of your order. So it's novelty. I had my shoulder replaced, so my writing's even worse than it used to be. Okay, what about the high-end guys? This is the big department stores. What do you need from them? Excuse me, Ricardo? Did you say something?
No, I'm not.
Oh, you're just scratching
Well,
your
yeah,
ear. I thought you were raising your hand, but I was hoping you were raising your hand.
Clients.
Yep. Okay, what does a high-end department store or a high-end store do for you? Do you care how much you sell there?
No.
You want to be in Bloomingdale's catalog. You don't care if you sell 1 unit or 6. What you want is Bloomingdale's catalog said this is a hot new product. Okay? Pretty easy. And what do you say to the buyer? When he says, how many do I have to order?
No.
Excuse me?
I'll pay
You
you.
don't need to order, you just need to do the advertising.
Oh, what we want is you to put us in your catalog. We don't care if you give us an order. No, so if you're Bob and talking to the high-end buyer, what do you say to them? When they ask the question, how many do we have to order?
You order as many as you want.
Yeah, we're not going to be able to reship, so you don't want to be embarrassed by being out of stock. So you figure out how many you're going to sell, and that's how many I'll give you. If you think you're only going to sell 1, I'll sell you 1. If you think you're going to sell 1,000, order 1,000. But don't worry about it. It's your problem, not my problem. It's a pretty easy way of putting the burden on them, saying, because all you care about is their credibility. And are you giving them something else?
Based on that,
Yeah. So we're giving them ads, free ads, before Christmas time of a hot product in a hot category in TV Guide. Do you think Bloomingdale's ever advertised in TV Guide? No, you don't know the market, but TV Guide was considered sort of down market. And so for them, this was an experiment to see if the TV Guide reader was somebody that they actually sold to. And you got it for free. Now, if you're the buyer and your boss says, what are you doing buying this thing from TV Guide Trivial Pursuit? What's your answer? I got an $85,000 ad for free and I only had to order 500 units. Let's see, 500 times 1250 is 62,500, and I got an $85,000 ad. Tell me again your problem, boss. You know, if you think about it, it's brilliant, because they have absolutely no risk. So, reputation, ads, the mass merchandiser. What do you want from them? This is where you get your volume. And you're giving them ads as well. How did he manage the ads? These guys are first. These guys come out just before Christmas, and they can advertise a cut price. Now, what is that good for that buyer? It's wonderful. Look, I got a free ad in a national magazine, 17 million copies, printed the 2 weeks before Christmas, advertising a discount from something that's already been advertised, and it goes to exactly my natural market. Now, is there a better deal than that for them? And those ads, does Bob care what price it sold at the week before Christmas? Does the buyer care what price it sold at before Christmas? So what does Bob ask him for in terms of an order? Well, think about it for a minute. If I'm in every Kmart, how many am I going to sell? There are 2,000. One of the exhibits in the case, so I won't beat up, but they have how many, 2,200 stores? So 2,200, yeah, it doesn't matter. 2,200 times anything is a lot. And so what do you say to the buyer about his order? Just don't run out of stock. I'm not going to be able to deliver. Now, he also wants a couple of other things here. He wants a final sale. He doesn't want a return. And that's very important. So again, he doesn't want to push them on a high order quantity. What he says is, you order exactly what you think you can sell, and I'll deliver that to you, but that's all you get. So now, is the guy going to tend to over-order or under-order in this condition? You think so? Let's think of the behavior of the customer. You've just advertised this product a week before Christmas at a bargain price, and he walks in and finds that you're out of stock. This is not good. Now, what does the buyer say if he has a little stock left over?
The sales, that's right.
Says it goes on sale in January, right? We'll cut the price, we'll get rid of the crap, and that's what remainder tables are for in merchandising. You know, so there's an incentive actually on the part of the buyer to buy more because they don't want to be embarrassed by being out of stock. These guys don't care about being out of stock. They like exclusivity. These guys are a very different beast, which is part of the reason you need different sales reps. You're trying to teach them, you're trying to have the subtlety of dealing with different people. Now, what about Heller? What do you want from them?
Efficiency.
Collection. Now, do you think it's better to have the bill come out from Heller or from TV Guide Trivial Pursuit? Why?
But they already have the know-how how to build people and how to make them pay. Very different than a small startup.
If I don't pay the small startup, what happens to me?
Nothing.
Nothing.
They will have to sue you, but they don't have the money to do that.
If I don't pay Heller, what happens?
My credit is cut.
Yeah, it's a slightly different, you know, what's that old?
They don't know how to check the credit.
Somewhere in the Bible it says when the lamb and the lion lie down together, only the lamb need be nervous. And I think here you see they want billing and collection. You're willing to give them 1%. Are you giving them that for the credit? No, they're not paying you up front. Unlike most factoring, they're paying you when they receive the money. Because you don't care about the credit. You care about the collection. And you don't need the money up front. Because I'm sure Sam is able to get 90 to 120-day terms from his printing friends. Those are normal. Could Bob get 120 days from a printing company? How about from the paper that he ordered? If you're a small, new company, you pay up front. If you're a continuing customer, and what happens if he doesn't need all the paper that he ordered? If you're a small company, what happens to you? You eat it. If you're Sam Kaplan and you don't need all the paper you ordered, what do you say? I need a different grade next week. Can we switch the grade? You know, same bill, just give me a different grade paper. Very different thing. Okay, we got one last player. TV, content. Is the questions a give or a get? Is it something we gave to them or something we want from them? They want it. Why do you think they want it?
They want to be part of the process. They want to be in charge of the content. They want to control it.
Okay, so they think of themselves as the expert in TV, and they don't want somebody asking stupid questions with wrong answers. So for them, that's an important need, is to be sure. Now, that has some negative consequences we can talk about. And are they doing this as a company?
No, their employees are.
Mr. Annenberg made many billions of dollars as the owner of TV Guide, but this is a way of giving something extra to people. It's almost a little bonus. Use your expertise, get some money, etc. What does TV Guide get out of it? They get some money, right? Is that what matters?
Without risk.
Got that in the wrong spot. They have nothing up front, and we're giving them what? Yeah, it's interesting. We're also getting the brand from them, which is important. What are we giving them? Okay, we're giving them.
Line of product and you offer to that line.
Do you think Annenberg cares about this? I mean, Walter Annenberg sold his business for about $4 billion. This is $300,000. Last I checked, I can multiply $4 billion by a very small fraction and get $300,000. What do you think he's getting?
You're getting a little prestige because TV Guide in the States is certainly not a A-class.
It ain't Time Magazine. It may be better than Time Magazine now, but that's a different problem. How much Do you think TV Guide has ever sold to this group? Is this a perfect market test for them to sell to the high-end retailers? You know, Robert says that it's not, they're not known as a great, you know, they think of selling through Vogue and, you know, other things. What happens is this, if this is the only advertising place and people come in asking for it, what have you learned about TV Guide? You've learned it's a good place to advertise to your customer. Now, what does that do for Walter Annenberg? It builds his credibility with a segment of the market he's never been able to reach. By the way, it turns out he was calling almost every week to find out how sales were going, personally. I mean, this is the guy that owned this big company, and he was very interested because, you know, he ran the racing, he made his money in the racing forum, and then he made his money in TV Guide. These were not the Atlantic Monthly magazines. And he was very proud to have Bloomingdale's and others advertising in this. Okay, so now you told me this is a risky business. So somebody had to take the risk. Did Alan Charles take much of a risk? Okay. He worked a couple of weekends to make 6 times as much money as he would have, or 8 times as much money as he would have. And did he believe he was taking a risk that this game wouldn't sell? No, he didn't believe there was any risk that it wouldn't sell. And he had a good deal. Okay. TV Guide, were they taking a risk? As long as they got control of the questions, they felt they were in pretty good shape. And by the way, they did something that very few companies are. Bob gave them a list of 17 references. They checked with every reference before they signed the deal, because they just wanted to make sure that they wouldn't be embarrassed by him not doing it. Okay, did Sam take a risk? He put up the money. Oh, guys, let me explain something to you. When did he put up the money? When the contract was signed. He already had the TV Guide. And when does the money have to go up to produce? After you have firm orders. Let's see, so I put the money up to finance inventory against firm orders from major credits with Walter Helder getting, how risky is that? Okay, so Sam wasn't taking any risk. Sales reps. Reputation. So how did they manage the risk? They knew Bob. They said he'll deliver, right? They weren't worried about, was this a complicated thing for Bob knowing that Sam was involved? How hard do you think it was to deliver these games? And by the way, when did they have to go out and put their reputation at risk? After Alan had designed the game, right? So they knew what the game was, and they knew you had a means to produce it, and they knew there was a demand out there. I don't think there's much risk there. How about the high-end retailer? Free advertising, sell as many as you want, you control the price. How about the mass marketer? You got 34 million impressions in a full-page ad in one of the major magazines in the United States for free, and you order what you want. Do you think Selden and Schlechter was selling Trivial Pursuit to the mass marketers? No, they were constrained on production. If you're Selden and Schlechter, you sell to the high-end retailers, and these guys don't have a product in the category. So they get a product in the category, they get free advertising, and they're told to order as many as they want, as long as they put some in every store. Now, was Heller taking risk? No. They only sent money in once. I thought this was risky. What happened to the risk here, folks? You told me it was risky. I remember you distinctly saying it was risky. Now, this is how we sort of came to think about entrepreneurship in a slightly different way. Because when you look at this, what happened to the risk? It disappeared. Why did it disappear?
Because he hedged all the risk of the chain, the duties to you.
He was asking people to do everything that they were doing anyway, right? And was that reducing or increasing their risk? Reducing it. So by asking people to do what they do anyway, they were simply diversifying their risk pool, and he was putting it together in a way that dissolved the risk for him. Now, what was his risk? We didn't talk about his risk. Well, reputation. And that's pretty important because this whole thing came together because of his reputation. Now, for those of you who have went to the University of Chicago, we could try and figure out something about some interesting numbers. If your wholesale price was $12.50 and your manufacturing was $3.10, that sounds like a pretty good contribution margin. You gave the inventor 4% on average, so that was 50 cents. You gave the royalty to TV Guide of about $1 on average. You had sales expense of 20% because Bob was getting that 20% commission to a separate company. So from the company's perspective, there was $2.50 that went out the door, and you had an ad allowance of $1.25. So your total costs there added up to $8.41, which had a contribution margin of therefore $4.09, I think. Now, what's your break-even point on this? He said he put up about $50,000 fixed cost. Just for, I did math as a young person, but I haven't used my partial differential equations very much. And I haven't run a Riemann-Stieltjes integral in a long time. What's my break-even? If my fixed costs, about $12,000. Somewhere around $12,000. When you get the order from Kmart, if they order 100 for each store, you're at twice your break-even point. This is a real tough business, right? Now, why does this work so well? The original thing of keeping your fixed costs low. Now,
Doesn't Walmart require a lower price?
well, this was before Walmart, but Kmart was as bad as Walmart.
Yeah.
But no, they were just willing to discount. I mean, they probably nowadays would demand a lower price for volume, but it wasn't going to be drastically lower. And even if it raised the break even to 20,000, you care. I mean, yes, you care, but it doesn't change the fundamental economics. Now, from Bob's perspective, it's interesting. Bob actually made more than Sam, right? Even though he split it 50-50? Because he paid the sales reps 7% and he took 20% off the top. So he got an extra $972,000 out of this deal just from the sales margin. Do you think Sam cared? Because Sam was taking home about $1 million for the investment of how much? $1,161,000 is the number I calculated. So Sam took home about $1 million for having fun. And by the way, that was $1 million in those days. that was a little more than now. So I think you have to look at this. So one of the first things we try and teach in entrepreneurship, it's not about crazy risk-taking. It's about finding an opportunity. What was the opportunity here?
First thing, tie up with a big net.
Guys, they have created a product you can't manufacture. And then he saw a TV guide. What do you think of his letters to TV guide?
Very detailed and very specific about his next steps.
They were cold calls, and they were key to his success.
What was a characteristic of those letters that maybe escaped? One of the things I look at is he did a great job. He says, look, I'm not trying to sell you on any way of doing it. Here are 3 different ways of doing it. You can choose. I'm indifferent between these 3 ways of doing it. What does this say to TV Guide?
You are controlling the process.
Yeah, it's your choice. I'm not trying to sell you on a way of doing it. I haven't structured this. Now, what was his guess? They'd choose the royalty way, right? You know, if you're them, do you want to be in the manufacturing business of games for a 3-week period for 1 year? Answer is no. But he sort of said, if that's what you want, I'll help you. So he gave them a lot of choice and actually showed them the way to it. So let me switch gears. Some of you we want to end at about 10:30, so okay, so I have 2 screens, right? Yes.
Question. Why do you think the Canadian company, which was really successful selling to Canada, didn't have the idea of selling to a much bigger market?
I think they really had production problems. I mean, the collation of the cards, if you know Trivial Pursuit, there's something like 12,000 cards, or 1,200 cards. And actually, they're printed on heavy stock, and they're hard to work with. Now, you could, and they were surprised by the success. I mean, it's easy. They eventually got it so they could automate it very quickly. But at the beginning, it was actually a hand collation, and it just was a mess. And they couldn't take orders because they didn't know they could deliver.
Should have outsourced it to China. It was too early in those days.
In 1983, you didn't want to outsource it to China. Those gray suits weren't quite the thing that worked.
Take it out to Singapore.
Yep. But you think about how many people were thinking outsourcing at that point.
Well, he did.
He did.
That was all outsourced.
Yes,
Everything.
he did. But do big companies?
No.
No, those were the eras of vertical integration. We'll cut our costs. We'll make sure we have high gross margin, even though it might raise our fixed costs.
That's something I wanted to ask. Outsourcing was actually beginning in the 80s. If this had been 10 or 20 years earlier, would have this have been possible?
It's an interesting question. I think it would have, but not at the scale, because you didn't have the national. This was a phenomena really of Kmart, and the Kmart and Toys R Us, the big national chains. Up to that point, you know, it was really the 70s where you had the emergence of these national chains that enabled you to sell in $20,000, $30,000 or 20, 30,000 unit sale.
And what about the TV market 10 years earlier? I don't think it was a massive market as it was in the 80s.
Well, the 70s it was. 60s was beginning. It was really with CBS when Paley began to measure audiences. And he could show advertisers that he was delivering the right audience. And that was a phenomenon of the early 60s to late 60s is when Frank Stanton brought in audience measurement.
But all abroad the United States,
Yeah. Well, you have to remember that the way the United States was set up with TV is because RCA was so powerful. It's hard to imagine RCA being powerful. They had a limit on stations owned, so you can only own 5 stations. So the local stations were independent, and they were paid for carriage by giving advertising. So it was a very, and that was Frank Paley from CBS or Paley from CBS that did that. So the industry was structured that enabled this to happen. So it was so let me, yes.
How did he manage to accurately find the amount of retail sales? He said he was selling about 500,000, but he was telling the retailers to order how many products they wanted. So, and it was exactly.
It was plus or minus 16%. Well, first, he'd been in the business. So he knew the standard order from a Kmart, that they would want 100 per store. And that, they probably wanted 96 per store because they packed in boxes of 24. But he knew that. And he just figured from there, you do that with Toys R Us, Kmart. He really didn't care much about, you knew the number of, if you look at the case, he actually knew the number of outlets that each of these companies had. And having been in the business, if you look at page 14, he could tell you exactly how many stores each of the companies he was selling to had.
Even though giving them free will to choose, he knew that they were.
That they had a standard order quantity that was highly probable. And, he wasn't trying to make an exact projection. But the one thing he said is if Kmart didn't order for every store, I wouldn't sell to them. And if TV Guide wouldn't give me the free ads, this deal was dead. Those were the two conditions, he said, that made him go forward, is that if I needed an order from Kmart for every store and I needed TV Guide to give me the ads. And those are the two things.
I have another question. Why there's such a big difference between what he sold and the Trivial Pursuit 10 million? Since he knew the market, he had access to all of it.
It was a crappy game. And the reason it was a crappy game was this. Think about asking real experts to, I don't know your shows, but there were questions like, what was the name of the dog in, nobody could get them right. The thing that makes Trivial Pursuit fun is on average, probably except for pop culture for me, I know the answers to a lot of the questions. And here, when you have experts design the questions, it made it really too hard. And so it wasn't a fun game to play. People like to win. People like to feel smart. And by having the experts design the questions, they didn't do it.
Howard,
Yes,
one
Bob.
question. Why did the big boys, Parker, et cetera, why did they thumbs down this? This is so obvious. Why did they turn it down?
I think it was less than, think of the speed with which it had to be done. Harvard has a motto, life here is one century after another. And that's true in a lot of big companies. It's going to take you 18 months to do anything. And part of what he had going for him is the ability to deliver a product to the show in 4 months. Imagine just how many, it would take you 4 months to schedule the committee meetings for product approval in most big companies. So this enabled him to do something. So, I hope you find this case, I hope it changed your mind. I do not think entrepreneurship is about risk-taking. I think it's about figuring out, and we'll come to this. But my background is weird, as Claudio said. I don't have a discipline. I actually just did things that were fun along the way over 40 years and created a couple courses, one in real estate, the entrepreneurship. I guess I've created about 5 courses. Because I like to study problems and figure out if you can teach them. I've been on the board of about 40 companies over the years, but over 40 years, that's not too many. I've been on some for as many as 25 years. I was on the board of the company that started the Weather Channel, weather.com, a bunch of other things. Been on a bunch of really very interesting boards, some that failed, some that succeeded. And I've done a lot of investing through a company called Baupost. It's been quite successful over time. So I'm both a believer and skeptic about entrepreneurship. I don't think you just do it. I think it actually helps to know what you're doing. And I think if there's anything that you take away from this, it's about Bob did it when he was ready. He wasn't straight out of school. He had the experience. He had the knowledge. He had the contacts. He had the credibility. Now, you know, entrepreneurship got a bad name because in 1700 and something, Richard de Catillon said, the entrepreneur buys at a certain price and sells at an uncertain price and bears the risk of the transaction. That was the definition of entrepreneurship. And ever since, it's been labeled, oh, you're the risk taker. Well, I don't. Does George Hall like risk? I don't think so. I don't think he's ever done a deal where he saw risk. You know, he said, I may have a little extra leverage, but that's okay because I know how I can pay it back because the company is not well run and we can get more margin. I know very few entrepreneurs who succeed in the long run who love risk because there's plenty of risk out there in the world that you get whether you want it or not. Do you have to be a capitalist? Well, I would argue Insper is a very interesting entrepreneurial venture. As you know, it's part of the reason I've enjoyed working because it's not for money. I don't think it's for money you're doing it. I think there's a lot of money but it has the wrong sign for you. It's been a big investment. But in fact, it's as entrepreneurial as any other thing because trying to say what's the opportunity, what's the importance of this to the world, who are we serving is tremendously important. Do you have to be the founder? Well, Claudio didn't found Insper as far as I remember. Ray Kroc didn't found McDonald's. I can go through the list of most of the great entrepreneurs. Thomas Watson didn't found IBM. Andre didn't found Pactual. I mean, I can go through the list. And so, do you have to be an innovator? Well, not really. Being a good, fast copier is often, you might take credit for winning after the fact. I'm fascinated by some of the people that founded the companies that I founded. And of course, the French always used to say there's no sense in being an entrepreneur because if you succeed, people think you're a crook. And if you fail, people think you're stupid. But, so there's no winning in France for being an entrepreneur. So what we use as a definition is, I think, been very helpful to people because it makes it both studyable and drives the economists crazy. It's the pursuit of opportunity beyond the resources you currently control. Now, all parts of that are important. What's an opportunity? Well, an opportunity is a desired future state that's different from the present. You know, what you have is not an opportunity. What you want is an opportunity. Now, it turns out that makes it very hard to define exactly because what's an opportunity for Claudio is not necessarily an opportunity for me, is not necessarily an opportunity for Bob. And if you think of Bob Rees, this would not be an opportunity for anyone in this room. So he saw an opportunity that other people couldn't see because he had his own position. But an opportunity is also something you believe is possible. You know, I'd like to be young, rich, and handsome, but that's not possible. At least two of the three aren't. And, you know, to say I failed once at retiring, 3 times at dying, and 71 times at being on the Forbes list. But in fact, what you believe is possible is tremendously important. For those of you who are involved as entrepreneurs, one of the most important things you do is make other people believe it's possible. If you go across the list, the reason this worked for Bob is he made everybody believe it would happen. You know, he was enough of a salesperson with enough credibility that everybody that was involved believed it would actually work. And that's tremendously important. If you start to think about building a business, you can't go in and say, I don't know if this is going to work. You know, Cortez burned his ships when he arrived in Mexico, so there wasn't a choice. People had to win. But I think that if you think about most entrepreneurs, you have to go in with a positive attitude. Even if you wake up at night saying this isn't working so well, you still have to have a positive attitude. Now, as I've studied entrepreneurship around the world, there are basically 4 conditions which make entrepreneurial communities, to my mind. Resource mobility. Money and talent has to flow towards opportunity. Now, that's part of the problem in some countries, where in fact, unless you join the bureaucracy, there is no opportunity. Unless you are part of the crowd that lends money to each other, there's no opportunity because money doesn't flow. So resource mobility, ideas, people, and money, probably in that order, have to be mobile for there to be an opportunity. The second is you have to create community. You know, if you look at the communities that work, whether it's the Jewish community, the offshore Chinese, the Korean, what did they do when they had excess money? Did they put it in the bank? No, they reinvested in their own community. They would lend it first to their brother-in-law if they trusted him, or to a member of the community. They invested with each other. They didn't trust the banks, they didn't trust other people, but also it was a way of, in fact, creating and replicating the community. A third thing that's interesting is joy in the success of others. You know, many communities, there's an old expression in Russia, if the genie gives you 3 wishes, you use the first 2 to wish evil on your neighbors. That there are many communities in which success of others is deemed as pulling you back. Whereas I was partners in many of my activities in the Jewish community. I don't know how many dinners I bought $10,000 tickets to celebrate success of my friends. That, you know, as soon as somebody succeeds, people are saying, oh, I'm so glad they succeeded, and you celebrate it. I was raised Mormon. Well, I didn't know Willard Marriott. He was a friend of my grandmother's, but boy, everybody was proud of Willard Marriott because he succeeded. Everybody was proud of even Karl Rove. I mean, that somehow the success of one member of the community is effective for other people to feel good about themselves. That's very different than many of the communities where, well, think of England, where if you didn't marry into the nobility, you were still toast socially. And I could go through many other countries where, in fact, success of others is not deemed to be positive for you. And then you have to value change. You know, there are a whole bunch of stupid studies in entrepreneurship. One was about personality. Oh, we've got to have a certain personality type. Well, I know great entrepreneurs who've been wallflowers at the accounting convention, and I know great entrepreneurs who are very good salesmen. What's the difference? They have to choose the right business. So one of the things we try and teach in our classes is know yourself. Know what you're good at. I hate cold calls. I think I'm a reasonably good salesman, but I hate cold calls. So if I'm going to work as a salesman, I need somebody to make the call for me. I just know it. First, I get bored on a cold call. Second, I'm not very good at it. I don't do something. So you have to know yourself and then find the industry that suits it. I mean, Bob is a salesman. The guy that founded Continental Cablevision couldn't sell you anything. He couldn't sell you water in the middle of a desert. He would begin pointing out the problems with it and how long and how warm it was. I just know him well enough to say, but he was great at the cable television business because he ran every number and he got a lot of credibility with the banks. So those 4 conditions exist. I think one of the wonderful things for all of you who are young, and maybe even Bob, but certainly for me, is the world's changing. There is a huge opportunity out there. Think where Brazil, I first came to Brazil, I think about 15 years ago almost now. Well, it's a very different world. You used to walk out of the Renaissance and they said, don't go out the door. Now they just say, don't have the camera around your neck. Very different world. But the world is changing. Brazil is part of the real, it's between the first and the second world economy. But think of what's happened to education. Think of all the things, the world is changing, it's good. The business model is changing. You know, some people like to think that the secret to success is dropping out of Harvard. You can be Zuckerberg and Gates. But if you look at all the dropouts, many of them are in ashrams in Vermont. They're not actually millionaires, but they're billionaires. But in fact, the economic model allows success much earlier than it used to. Why? think Bob Reese, again, we have access to resources now that we never did. You think of internet sales activities. You think about, I mean, if you want an answer to a question, you get on the web. You don't have to go to a library. Our circulation of books has dropped from about 240,000 a year to something like 20,000 a year because that's not the way people gather information. And the valuations are changing. Will Facebook be Google, or will it be MySpace? I'm betting on MySpace, but at least I sold all the stock I got in the IPO, or before the IPO. And the required expertise is changing. But there's still some jobs that need to be done, and I think that, you know, if we think about the world, the connectedness is both good news and bad news. Your reputation, Bob had a reputation among a very small group of people, right? That was key to his success. What happens now if you screw somebody in business? Everybody knows it, you know? My grandmother used to say, make sure your words are sweet because you never know when you're going to have to eat them. But in fact, when you think about the connectedness, it's changed the world into both our ability to reach people. You know, they used to speak of 6 degrees of separation. I think they did a study on Facebook, and they found with all the hundreds of millions of people connected on Facebook, the average number of connections is like 4.2. So it's dropped. And I just, for fun, went through the list of the Forbes billionaires the other day. And I asked myself, how many of them that I thought would answer my call if I called them, that I'd met them before and knew them personally? And how many did I know a person who I knew they would answer that person's call? It was incredible. It was like 20% of the people on the Forbes list that would either be 1 degree of separation or 2 degrees of separation. My guess is if I went around this room and asked you to establish your network of connections in Brazil, it would, you know, there would be very few people you couldn't reach in 2 degrees. And I mean not just the important people. I mean down into some pretty remote places, because you know somebody who knows that place well. I think we're in the manic stage. That's a psychological, you know, manic depressive, because is the world great or is it falling apart? I can make equally strong cases for both, but it doesn't matter. And we got rapid mood swings. We just hit an all-time high yesterday. Why, I have no idea, other than if your alternative is zero interest, I guess that's where you put it there. And everybody expects everything to be free, which is a little bit of a problem. And there's a sense of consumer entitlement that is fun for business. So, you know, what's going to happen when marijuana is legal? I don't think it will increase the consumption. So I suspect everybody who wants to smoke marijuana can find it right now. If you think of you know, in 2000 we were talking about reach, eyeballs, stickiness and growth, get big fast, pay-in options, win big or be a turkey. And the attitude of the young people was, I'm out of here, dude. Whereas now we're talking about some much more complicated things. Mass customization. How do we deliver what people want, when they want it, where they want it, at a low price? We're talking about getting it right before you go out big. And that's where the minimum viable product literature is coming in. There's a lot of things that are happening. And I think people now remember this famous words that happiness is a positive cash flow. Many people have discovered that that's an important part of it. But too many people are thinking paycheck is a good thing to have. I would argue that's the riskiest thing you can do. So I want to end on time, so I'll skip through some of this. But, you know, if you think about it, part of the problem is people believe you should follow the bouncing ball down Wall Street. The best companies I've worked for are private companies, because they can, in fact, make the investment when they need to, and they don't care about what some 26-year-old analyst says. They actually do the right thing. I think I hope as you go through your education process, you know, we are talking about communities. People are desperate for community. Now, we could call it marketing, but it's really much more about getting reassurance of who I am, what and what I'm selling. That regulatory skills, you know, the United States is becoming more like Brazil. You'd better understand regulation. I've looked at a number of deals to invest in, and too many entrepreneurs are ignoring the fact we're in a different regulatory environment. Brazil, it's impossible. Is it fun to get approval for building a building, Claudia? Why are you laughing? I think I hit a sore spot here. Taking a few weeks to do it. And, you know, there are some tough old problems with public relations being more and more important because that's free advertising. Cost control is ever so much more important. We're competing with, you're competing, we're all competing with countries. You know, you can't afford to manufacture in coastal China anymore. We plotted in one company I'm involved in where our products are manufactured. They've all moved inland. They used to be all along the coast. Now they're starting to be manufactured in Vietnam, Indonesia, and other places. And logistics. You know, I would argue that more and more countries are going to focus on the fact they have to manufacture internally, again, because the logistics are getting much more complicated. You know, who would have predicted the consequences of an earthquake in northern Japan? It just about shut down a number of industries. The auto industry had a hard time manufacturing because one of the critical plants was in that city, and that cut out 50% of the world capacity. There was a fire in a plant in Formosa that cut out 50% of the ceramics for semiconductor manufacture. People are starting to notice those things. That's before you get to intentional cyber attacks and that kind of stuff. So what I think Bob showed is the importance of deep industry knowledge, patience. He didn't say, I've got to have a deal. He waited till a deal was so compelling that he said, now's the time to pounce. One of the problems for young people and what we see now in entrepreneurship is everybody thinks unless you've made it by the time you're 30, you're a turkey. But in fact, what I find is people who actually know the industry do a lot better, but that requires patience and getting to know a set of customers in an industry. And by the way, you probably want to say, why didn't Bob invest the money? He could have made an extra $1 million, according to my calculations, on a $50,000 investment with no risk. Yeah, it's this. He recognized that somebody else wanted to make the money, and by letting them in, he got a value that he couldn't have gotten for himself. But they're hard choices. One of the things I admire about Bob, he said, these are 3 things that have to happen or I won't do the deal. You know, he didn't write and convince, well, I really don't need TV Guide. Oh, well, if I don't get the ads, it's okay, I could buy them. He wanted them to be committed. So he had a very strong idea of what his commitments need. And one of the most important things you can do in entrepreneurship is say no. It may be a good idea, but it's not for me. Or it may be a good idea, or it may be a bad idea. And I think one of the things you learn in investing in entrepreneurial ideas is sometimes it was a bad idea. I went through about 400 investments that our family has made. And it was an interesting calculation. I divided them into sort of 4 categories. Excuse the language, shit happens. This included a suicide on the part of the entrepreneur. It included a guy that got brain cancer 3 weeks after I invested in him. It included a nationalization of a very good business by the government of Tanzania. Even though we had the Commonwealth Development Corporation as a partner, you couldn't have controlled for any of those things. Then there were sort of bad ideas, or you made a good bet, but the dice just turned up wrong. Somebody is smarter, faster, quicker. Then there was the made it safely through, and then there were some good things happened. And by the way, if you took that group as a whole, added them all up, there were 2 interesting calculations. One of the things that we lost almost everything. Over 80% of them were in co-investments with venture capital firms because they are really looking for the pools. Now, on average, I did okay with them, but over 80% of the investments where I lost everything were co-investments with venture firms. If you take all of those 4 categories, we returned about 8% over the last 20 years. But there was this other category of bluebirds landed on your shoulders, and they didn't deposit. You know, what do they say about the difference between a Texas, this is back in the 80s, this is what's the difference between a Texas real estate developer and a pigeon? Is the pigeon can still make a deposit on a Mercedes. But what made all the difference was about 5 investments that paid off handsomely, and that gave us an overall return in excess of 20% over the last 20 years. Could I have picked out those investments? Well, I've used it as a test. I throw out the 4 business plans to my students and say, pick the winner. I have never had the best investment I've made in my life picked out from that. And by the way, it was also the best investment for the senior partner at Matrix Capital. It was a really dumb idea. But you had a great team that morphed the idea, and thus far it's returned over 500 times its money that we invested. And it's still going. I could tell you other stories about it, but it does say in none of the best investments would you pick them out of the pile. They will look just like the others. Yes, Ricardo.
So then you disagree with Buffett? If you have a great team and a lousy business, a lousy industry, you can make it.
No, I wholeheartedly agree. It's the great team that is going to win, and a great, honest team. The first test we always use, is there any indication this guy likes to pull fast ones? I mean, I've had people explain how carefully they were not avoiding paying taxes. I run quickly. I think if somebody's willing to play games with the government that can throw you in jail, why are they not going to play games with me? So I have some basic rules as I'm trying to write down for the kids. And then the last thing is it requires courage and perseverance. And by the way, a little luck helps. Anybody who claims that they didn't have luck when they succeeded as an entrepreneur is rewriting history. So the one thing that I think we always have to remember for ourselves and our own careers and for the companies that we work with is you either obsolete yourself or your competitor will. You know, one of the interesting things in investing right now is I don't think the ways we've succeeded in the past are going to succeed in the future. I'm quite sure yet how, but if you think about Brazil, you've had massive changes in the model of success, I believe. You know, it's one of the things I think you ought to say, well, what made for success in the past? And that's interesting, and it ought to belong in the history department, but what's the future going to be? So I promised to end right around 10, and I think I will. I have about 40 more slides, but I'll leave those, and you can do with them what you want. So thank you very much. And by the way, just don't listen to the economists. Risk and reward aren't correlated.